Hey guys, welcome back to the Aquatic Lounge. On today's video, I'm going to take you behind the scenes of a place that most people don't get to go. I was really fortunate, and he was incredibly gracious to allow me into his home. And while I was down near Tampa, when I was speaking down on my speaking tour, Florida, when just outside of Tampa, I get to go behind the scenes and introduce you guys to a world-renowned collector, a world-renowned breeder of Central American cichlids, which are near and dear to my heart. Super cool. His stock is breathtaking. At the beginning, he wasn't really open for me doing any sort of video or anything like that whatsoever. But after a couple hours of sitting around and shenanigans, he realized where my true heart was, and we're both two peas of the same pod. So he enabled me, allowed me to go and do some video of certain things that he allowed me to share with you guys today. And then we did a nice little interview afterwards. So without further ado, I want to show you Mr. Dan Sharifi, Cichlids of the Americas. It's really cool. But I'm very fortunate today. Austin and myself, my traveling partner, had the distinguished honor of coming and visiting a fish house that is unlike anybody else's. So I'm sitting here with a good friend of mine now. His name is Dan Sharifi. Awesome meeting you, Dan.
Likewise.
Thank you very much for having us today. It's been absolutely mind-blowing. But we're going to do a quick little interview for you guys so you get to know a little bit about this guy and why he's probably one of the best collectors and the most knowledgeable guys about Central American cichlids. His stock is absolutely exceptional. And I was very lucky to be able to get a few videos of some of the real nice fish in his room, and that'll be included in this video coming up. But Dan, tell me a bit about yourself and how you got into fish and how you ended up where you are today.
Well, I started out like everybody else does as a hobbyist, and I kept fish, and I had some of the old books that everybody's familiar with, and
the dream books.
The dream books, and you know, for many years I would just go to pet stores looking for those fish, and I never found any of them. Yep. And I got to collecting a few of them.
Was it always Central American cichlids? That's what caught your interest right away?
Yeah, no. The first fish I had was a goldfish, believe it or not, and I threw it in a swimming pool that wasn't being used when I lived in Argentina, and the fish grew from about an inch and a half to about 10 inches in about a matter of a year. Yeah. So I would spend hours at a time looking for the fish in this green muddy water, and you would spot it. So I just became really attached to them. And then for the longest time I thought I'd be a marine biologist because I was so fascinated by fish, but I ended up going into the finance business, and you know, now I'm making a full circle now that I'm out of that business selling fish, and I'm glad I did it because it's a lot more rewarding than what I used to do before. So
Dan owns the company called Cichlids of the Americas. And why Cichlids of the Americas? Why New World cichlids? Everybody likes African cichlids. They're bright blue and bright yellow. You know, why don't you have those?
I think a lot of it is just the personality of them. Each one of them is phenomenal in terms of their personality. They all have distinct personalities. But the thing that really drew me to Central American cichlids is if you spend time looking at even the most basic Central American cichlid, like a convict, one of the things that they do is that they're ferocious about protecting their fry. Yeah. And their behavior when they're breeding is unlike most other fish. Whereas, you know, guppies or some of the others will just have their babies and scatter them. Yeah. Eat them. They'll do Central American cichlids. You can see a fish that's an inch or 2 inches stand up to something that's 5-6 times its size to protect its offspring. So that behavior is really what drew me to them initially. Yeah,
you go to a big fish show, like I travel fish shows all over the country and stuff, and you see the categories in the New World cichlid. The fish that always dominates is going to be like a big red devil or antelope type, and it'll charge the glass, and you know, little kids get right up there, and it's right against them in the face and stuff. Yeah, that drives it. That's awesome. Do you have a favorite fish over all these years? Do you have one species or one particular fish that has enamored you?
You know, I still think that some of the riverine fish that really aren't as common in the hobby, like bullari,
the real philic stuff.
Yeah,
the more challenging.
The bullari, the nebuliferum, the giviceps. I think they're very similar in personality, but their appearances are all a little bit different. I like the tuba and the asfrasi as well too, but really any of the riverine fish are probably my favorite. And it really didn't start out that way. What I really always liked were the tank busters. I like the umbies and the dovi,
the big parachromids.
and the other thing that I also really liked was a lot of the Amphilophus, the Midas complex. But what happens is that as your time in the hobby expands or gets longer, you start expanding your taste, and you start learning a little bit more about some of these different fish. And what's interesting is, some of these riverine fish actually habitate waters of more aggressive fish as well. So it's interesting to see how they have adapted over the years to be able to handle different predators, different environments. So I've kind of, right now the phase that I'm in is I'm really interested in those, but that may change. So
yeah, I've always kept them, and I always tell people there's almost every river system you're going to go to, there's going to be a predator, which is a parachromid type. There's going to be, I call them water cows, and that's all your Vieja types, your synspilums, your melanoderms, your fenestratums. And then there's always going to be invertebrate pickers, which is like your thrick, these types. And then there's always going to be what I call like a geophagus or a sifter type, like your altifrons and those types. And generally all those fish will cohabitate together properly if the tank's proper, and it's big enough, but it gets all the different stratas of the tank with fish in it. Those are all favorites. Now, I know you do an absolute ton of collecting. Do you have a favorite country?
It's kind of different, because when I started collecting, it was with the objective of just finding a specific fish. So when I first started collecting, I would go to a place and look for a specific fish, and that was the extent of the trip. But what ended up happening was, once you've done it for a few times, and part of the challenge is the first time that you catch a fish out in the wild, I was just so excited that I had the fish. I'm like, oh my God, I have a fish. It didn't matter what it was. It could have been a Jack Dempsey that I caught, or a convict type that I caught. But the fact that there was a wild caught fish in my hands, because
seeing them in the wild in their own habitat and studying the natural habitat.
So what ends up happening is after a while, after you go collecting, you start understanding the habitat and start learning more about what's happened over the last year and a half, 2 years. Is the fish is kind of a byproduct of understanding where these fish live. So I would say that my favorite country is probably to collect in is Panama. It's probably the hardest country to get to.
Most challenging one to collect in.
It is. But Panama is probably one of the few countries where I think you can still find undescribed species, because it's not as accessible as some of the other countries. If you go to a country like Belize, what you'll find is that it's got a wide array of fish, and it's fairly simple to navigate through Belize. But Panama is a completely different environment. It's
well, the other challenges of like collecting in Central America is like you can say, okay, I really like this species, and I really like this species, and I like this species. But as we were saying, you can go to this one river system, which might be a 5-hour drive on a dirt road with potholes and broken down roads and bridges, to collect that one parachromid type. But the other one that you want to collect might be a 3-day trip away to catch it, because there's only going to be one parachromid type in that river area, and then you got to go 5-6 hours away to catch another one.
In the case of asfresi, you'll have loisel living with them. Or, fairly aggressive. You'll have a fairly aggressive parachromis species living in there that gets fairly large. But on some of the asfresi, we saw a female that was probably a good 13 or 14 inches, and I couldn't believe I'd seen a female that big, and it was dead. So it was just one of those things that you run into, and you see a dead fish, but you don't realize. I mean, you could tell it was a female by the size of its breeding tube, and the color was absolutely crazy. But Panama is one of those countries where if you go collecting, you can collect 1 or 2 or 3 species on one trip, but you're not going to be able to collect 6 or 8 or 10 different species, because it's just not accessible. Whereas a country like Belize, you can go to 6, 7, 8 spots in a matter of a couple of days and collect quite a few species. But I think each country has its own challenges.
It's a nice way of putting it. Yeah.
You know,
Collecting them is the one hard part to start, but it's
Yeah.
actually getting them out of the country, getting them home, and
Yes.
making
And-
sure you have all the paperwork to do it properly, which
and-
most people don't do.
And then the other part of it is like if you go to Costa Rica, there's three distinct populations of alfari, and you have to make sure you get the right one. So, believe it or not, the ones in the central part of Costa Rica are the most colorful. But if you go to either coast, you'll find more that are washed out. So I mean, there's part of it is collecting, and then part of it is collecting, a premier example of that fish. So, one of the things that I always say is you can get a wild caught fish, but it doesn't mean that it's an attractive fish. It
Yeah.
could be an ugly population of that fish. So, you got to be careful, what you choose and what you bring back, and be selective about it.
And beauty is totally in the eye of the beholder too.
Absolutely.
Pure CI is a two-tone brown fish that gets big, but in the right tank set up properly,
Absolutely.
it's a beautiful fish.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's always in the eye of the beholder. Do you have any interesting stories on the road? Anything you want to share? Something weird mishaps or real challenge that you're faced?
Yeah, the one thing I'll tell you is I'll tell you a little story about now. Since we're talking about Panama, I'll tell you a little story about Panama. Panama is it's what happened was I had been on quite a few collecting trips, but the first time I went to Panama, after the first day, I was so scared driving in some of the regions that we were driving that when I got home, I was with my wife. I told my wife, I said, "Hey, listen, we're gonna go back." And she kind of looked at me like I was crazy, and she knew why I was saying it, and it was because I was too afraid of driving. And I said, "Listen, no fish is really worth a person's life." So the problem was that we had gone right in the beginning of the season, right after their it was right after their rainy season, and what happens is they have a tendency of pouring just like asphalt in a pothole, but they don't have the equipment really to bring and kind of pack the asphalt in. So what'll happen is if they pour asphalt in, they basically hope that it bakes in the sun and it basically hardens. But that's not what happens. If you have a rain shower,
It washes it all out.
It washes it all out. So some of the potholes we were navigating around were bigger than the actual car that we were driving.
So you do that when you're doing your rental car, you check for the extra insurance.
Yes, absolutely. Right, full insurance package. So some of the potholes were actually bigger than the car that we were driving. So if you hit the pothole, you don't have to worry about blowing out a tire or a wheel or an axle. You have to worry about your engine blowing out because the pothole would be 4 to 5 foot deep. And then we saw one hole that was on the side of the road, but we had a really, really good angle towards it. And what we saw was that the hole went straight through. So there was nothing on the other side of the hole other than air. So obviously we were driving on the side of a mountain where the dirt underneath where the road was built
Just washed
had
away.
washed away. So the road was kind of on a very, very thin level of dirt. And you could actually see in this one pothole, you could see right through, and there was nothing other than skyline looking down in a pothole. So, that was probably one of the most interesting things that we saw. And I wanted to bail out on the trip after the first day that I was there, but luckily we stuck to it. And to put things in perspective, we were driving about 30 kilometers, which is roughly about 18 or 19 miles to our destination, and that 30 kilometers took us 2 hours and 10 minutes to drive. So it's quite an experience. And after you do it 5 or 6 or 7 times, you make that journey up that road 5 or 6 or 7 times, you kind of understand where the danger areas are.
Yeah, just get used to it. That's just driving in that country.
And it's like anything else. And the other thing is the rule of the road is whoever has the bigger car has the right of way. So if they have
Same thing in Costa Rica too. All
Yes.
the banana trucks and
Yes.
sugarcane trucks.
if they have a bigger car, you move out of the way because you're not going to play a game of chicken.
They pass each other around a blind corner.
Yeah, yes, they will. And we saw we saw one cab driver that apparently didn't understand the rule of the road, and we saw him get T-boned, and the car looked like a pretzel in a matter of seconds because it got hit by a truck. I don't know if there were any survivors or not, but and that was on our first trip, and it was on our way back home, and it was really unnerving. Aside from that, when I was at Belize on my first trip, we got lost in Belize, and we ran into
always a good thing to happen.
Yeah, we ran into some armed guards that detained us for no more than 5 minutes, but it felt probably like 5 hours to do a passport check on us. And then on our way back to Belize City, what happened was I think we were gonna get mugged, or somebody tried to mug us. But what I can tell you is we saw somebody throw a brick at our windshield, and it was like a little common brick that you see to build houses with. And I don't know how this happened, but we saw the brick coming towards the windshield, it was like almost in slow motion, and we just sped up just a bit, and the brick hit the top of the car and bounced right off the top of the car, and we drove off like nothing had ever happened. And there was a small dent on the top of the car, but nothing that you would even notice.
Well, people don't understand they don't understand the challenges of these collecting trips. You could do as much forethought and much planning as you want, and get all your Google Maps out and figure out, and you could drive for 5 hours on dirt roads to get to a bridge that's on the map, and that bridge got washed out.
So on that trip, I was with my wife also, and what happened was we just kind of looked at each other and said, "Did somebody just throw a brick at us?" and I said, "Yeah, that's what it was." And we just drove through, and that was it. There was really not a whole lot of commotion about it after the fact, until we got to the hotel that night, where we just basically said, "Hey, this is insane. Somebody threw a brick at us," and we just kind of brushed it off. But you don't stop to think of it at that moment. But what if that brick had actually gone through the windshield, and we had been mugged out there? But good thing nothing ended up happening out of it. But that was really the long and the short.
Well, you got to appreciate you're in a totally different world there. It's not like living at home.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Well, no, it's been awesome, Dan. How do people get in touch with you?
They can go to my website at cichlidsoftheamericas.com, and my email is on there, and they can send me an email with any questions they may have. And
wait till you guys see some of the videos of some of the fish. It's absolutely breathtaking.
And Chris is being really nice about it. They are nice, but I don't know if they're as nice as what Chris says. But
it definitely is.
I hope you guys enjoy the videos.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you.